In today's tutorial, we're going to be making these super fun and simple boysenberry mittens. They were designed to go with the boysenberry shawl that I posted last week, so be sure to check out that tutorial as well in case you missed it. The shawl with these mittens to match would make for an amazing gift that any friend or family member would love to have. Here's what you need. 1 ball of Red Heart with Love yarn. For my mittens, I use the color boysenberry, but in my sample today I use gold. Your favorite 6mm hook, scissors, and a yarn needle. I'll have all the materials I'm using in today's video linked below. I also want to take the time to thank you so much for liking my videos and for subscribing to my channel. It means so much to me and helps more crocheters just like you find this channel, which ultimately allows for me to keep free patterns and tutorials coming your way. So thank you so much for your support. And now, with all that out of the way, let's go ahead and get started. We're going to start off by working our mitten cuff. To begin, we'll start with a slip knot. Chain 18. So to chain, you yarn over and draw up a loop. Yarn over, draw up a loop. And we're going to keep continuing this until we have 18 total chains. Alright, so I have 18 foundation chains, and for this first foundation row, we're going to be working into the back bars of our chain, which you can find by flipping your chain over to the underside. Let's get a little closer. So see these back bars? We're going to begin by working a half double crochet into the 3rd chain from our hook. So we're going to be working into that back bar. Yarn over, and you're going to insert your hook into the 3rd chain, and we're going into that back bar. Draw up a loop, yarn over, and pull through all 3 loops on your hook. And we're going to work a half double crochet into each back bar across our foundation chain. So we're just repeating this process. So yarn over, insert your hook into the next back bar, draw up a loop, yarn over, pull through all 3 loops. Continue this process across the row. Alright, we're at our last stitch of the row. We're just making a half double crochet into that last chain. And we've just completed our first row. You should have 16 stitches. Turn your work, and now we're ready to start row 2. And we're going to begin by chaining 2. We're now going to be working into the back loop of each stitch across the row. So starting in the first stitch, work a half double crochet into each stitch across the row in the back loop only. So we're going into that back loop. So into that back loop only, we're making a half double crochet. Now we're going to go into the next stitch and do the same thing, going into that back loop and making a half double crochet. Repeat this process across the row. You'll want to remember at the end of every row, you should have 16 stitches. If you notice that your cuff is starting to get either wider or more narrow as you go, you're likely adding or losing a stitch. So be sure to count your stitches every couple of rows to make sure you always have the same number. Alright, I have 1 stitch left, and I'm making my last double crochet into that back loop. And we've just finished row 2, and now we're ready to begin row 3, which will just be more of the same thing. We're going to start by chaining 2, and we're going to half double crochet into the back loop only of each stitch across the row. We're going to be working in the same fashion until you've completed 16 rows. So if you'd like, pause here and meet back up with me once you're ready for the next step. Okay, so at this point we've crocheted 16 rows or about 8 inches of our cuff. Fold your cuff so that your starting and ending edges are touching. Line up your stitches the best you can, chain 1, and slip stitch your cuff together. So insert your hook into both layers, lining up your stitches, and we're just going to slip stitch. And then we're going into the next stitches, grabbing both layers. We're going to draw up a loop and slip stitch. Repeat this process across the row. Alright, so we've stitched together our cuff, and this is what it should look like. And so we don't need to worry about this seam because we're going to fold our cuff later on, so I'll just show you what it looks like. And see, the seam is honestly not even visible. Okay, so now we're ready to work our wrist. We're going to begin by chaining 1. And we're going to be making 24 single crochets evenly along this top edge. So we're just working to the sides of our stitches along this top edge. And remember, it doesn't need to be perfect. But as you go, try to make sure that you're catching true strands of yarn as you're working along the side. This will help prevent holes in your mittens on your wrist later on. So see, I'm just working into the sides of these stitches. And remember, we had 16 rows for our cuff, so you're doing a little bit more than just 1 stitch per row because we want to end up with 24 stitches total. So just try to make sure that it's as even as possible. Okay, so I've worked my way back around to the beginning, and for this project, we won't be joining our rounds. If you want to join your rounds, you can go ahead, but you'll have a seam, and I wanted to avoid that. Use your beginning tail and seam on your cuff join to eyeball the beginning and end of your rounds. I'm going to put a stitch marker on my cuff to help me eyeball the start and stop of my rounds, but you do whatever works best for you. For the rest of this project, we're going to be working in half double crochets. We're going to start our next round by working a half double crochet into each stitch around. So we're now in the first stitch from the previous round, and we just made a half double crochet. We're just going to half double crochet into each stitch all the way around our mitten. And we're just going to keep working in half double crochets until we have 5 total rounds of half double crochet on our wrist before we move on to forming the thumb. If you'd like, pause here and meet back up with me once you've done 5 rounds of half double crochet. Okay, so we've just done 5 rounds of half double crochet, and now we're going to start by doing one more round of half double crochet. But this time we're going to work our way around until we're about 3 stitches before our seam, or before the end of our round. Okay, so I'm almost there. Our thumb will be worked over 6 stitches, and we want those 6 stitches to be centered on our cuff seam. So I'm going to fold my mitten to make sure my 6 stitches are centered on my cuff. And it looks like I can actually do 2 more stitches. So 1, just checking again, and I'm just going to do another one. Okay, now that looks good. Now we'll begin shaping our thumb. So starting in the next stitch, we're going to work a double crochet. And we're going to work a double crochet into these 6 stitches. So this is my 3rd double crochet. 4, 5, and 6. Okay, so I have 6 double crochets here, and I'm just counting to make sure. And now we're just going to work the rest of our round in half double crochet. Continue working in half double crochet up to the last stitch before our double crochets begin. Okay, I'm at where my double crochets begin, so I'm going to now chain 6 and form my thumb. And now we're going to skip 6. We're going to skip over those 6 double crochet stitches we made, and into the next stitch, we're going to make a half double crochet. And we're just going to continue the round working in half double crochet. Right now, I suggest you pause here and try on your mitten to make sure that it fits you comfortably. Feel free to add or take away rows so that the mitten feels comfortable to you. Once you're happy with the fit of your mitten, continue working in half double crochets until you get to the end of the round. Alright, so we're almost to the point of our foundation chain. Once you reach back around to where the chain for your thumb is, work into the top loops only of the 6 chains. This will make it easier to attach your stitches for your thumb later on. So let's get a closer look. So we're just going to half double crochet into the tops of those chains. So if you can see, there's 2 loops for each of those foundation chains. You're going to crochet in the top loop. So see, I'm just going into that top loop of the chain, and I'm making a half double crochet. So we're just making 1 half double crochet in each of those 6 chains. And you'll see as you work how we're just working into the top chain. And so now the bottom chain will be left over for when we create stitches for our thumb later on. And it'll just make things a lot easier for you. Okay, so we've done our 6 stitches, and this next one is an actual stitch. So we're going to be working into our stitches now as usual. We're going to continue working in half double crochet for 9 more rounds, and you'll be using your stitch marker on the cuff seam to eyeball the start and end of your rounds again. Go ahead, pause here, and meet back up with me once you've finished 9 more rounds. I've done my 9 rounds, and now I want to try on my mitten. So let's zoom out, and now you can see my messy desk. Slide your hand into your mitten, and you want your mitten to be crocheted up to about the height of your pinky. So go ahead and adjust your mitten by taking rows away or adding more if you need to. Mine looks pretty good, so I'm going to keep it here and move on to my decreases. Okay, so now we're ready to work our decreases. And to start, I'm going to pull out 2 stitches so that we have 2 stitches remain unworked before the end of our last round. Lay your mitten flat out and grab a couple of stitch markers. You'll want to mark your side stitches with stitch markers. We should still have 24 stitches in the round for our mittens. So we want to separate that into 2. We want 12 stitches to mark the back of our mitten, and we want 12 stitches on the front of our mitten. And we're going to mark those stitches like so. I'm using blue markers on my pinky side, and I'm going to be using pink stitch markers on my thumb side, and that's just so I can easily tell which side is which as I'm working my rounds. Basically so I can tell where my starting and stopping point is for the end of my rounds, but it's not imperative that you use two different colors. Use whatever you have on hand. These marked stitches will be where we do our decreases. So I'm just going to do a quick count to make sure my counts are right. This doesn't need to be perfect, but you just want to make sure that you have 12 stitches on the front of your mitten and 12 stitches on the back of your mitten. And oops, it looks like I do need to adjust. Okay, so our stitches are marked and now we're ready to work our decreases. Work your half double crochet stitches until one stitch remains unworked before your first stitch marker over your thumb hole. Okay, so we're not going to work into this stitch, we're going to leave that last one unworked. And we're going to make a half double crochet decrease over the next two stitches by yarning over and inserting your hook into the front loop only of the next stitch. Draw up a loop, remove marker from your next stitch, insert your hook into the front loop, draw up a loop, yarn over, and pull through all loops on your hook. Replace your stitch marker into that new decreased stitch. This is an invisible decrease. And we're going to do that process again. So we're just going to take out the stitch marker in the next stitch, yarn over, insert your hook into the front loop only of the next stitch, draw up a loop, insert your hook into the front loop of the next stitch, draw up a loop, yarn over, pull through all loops on your hook. And we're going to replace that stitch marker into that new decreased stitch. We're going to continue working in half double crochets until we reach the other side, and we're going to repeat that same decrease process. I'm at the last stitch before my stitch marker, so I'm going to make an invisible decrease over these next two stitches. So doing my invisible decrease. Now I'm going to replace the marker into that new stitch. And then we're going to do an invisible decrease in the next two stitches. So just working that decrease. We're yarning over and pulling through all loops on our hook. And now we're going to put the marker into that new stitch. We're going to repeat the process of these decrease rounds until 12 stitches are remaining in our round. If you'd like, pause here and continue working your decrease stitches until you have 12 stitches left. Okay, so I now only have 12 stitches left, so I'm going to cut my yarn, leaving myself a nice long tail. I'm going to use the tail to cinch up the top of my mitten closed. So fasten off to secure, and this is what your mitten should look like. Grab your yarn needle and thread it with your tail. We're going to whip stitch around the top edge by inserting our needle from the inside of the mitten outward into each stitch around. So we're going from the inside of the mitten out into the tops of each of our 12 stitches. Continue this process until you get all the way back around to the beginning again. Alright, so once you reach back around to the beginning, we can now gently pull our tail to cinch the top of our mitten. Just gently pull out that tail. And once the top of the mitten is closed as much as it can be, we're going to use our yarn needle to stitch closed any remaining gaps in the center. Okay, and I think that looks good. So we're just going to thread our tail to the inside of our mitten to weave in. And let's just go ahead and get that out of the way right now. So I'm just pulling that tail to the inside of my mitten. And now we're just going to turn our mitten wrong side out so we can weave in this end. So I like to make a loop with my tail into a stitch and knot it to secure before weaving in. So I just like go into a stitch, make a loop, and pull my tail through that loop and just knot it to give it a little bit of extra security. So now just find a nearby row and weave back and forth along that same row until you feel like the end is sufficiently weaved in. So I got myself to a horizontal row and I'm just going to work my tail back and forth along this row. Let's just work back and forth. Okay, and I think that looks good, so I'm going to cut my yarn. And then now I'm going to just turn my mitten back right side out. And if you'd like, go ahead, try your mitten on and see how it feels. And at this point, it should fit you very nicely. It's fitting well, I'm super happy with it, and now I'm ready to move on to make my thumb. You're going to want to lay out your mitten just like this so your thumb hole is in the center and facing upward, facing towards you. Grab your yarn and begin with a slip knot. Grab your hook and insert your hook into a centered stitch along the bottom of your thumb outline edge. Slip your slip knot on, pull through the stitch to attach, and chain 1. Starting in that same stitch, we're going to make a half double crochet. Now we're going to half double crochet into the next stitch. And now we're going to make a decrease stitch over the last 2 stitches of our bottom thumb outline. So of those original 6 stitches. So those last 2 stitches we're going to decrease. We're going to do an invisible decrease again. So we're going to yarn over. Insert your hook into the front loop only of the next stitch. Draw up a loop. Insert your hook into the front loop of the next stitch, draw up a loop, yarn over, pull through all loops on your hook. So we've just done a decrease. And next we're going to decrease over our corner. And remember, these weren't actual stitches, but by doing this, we're going to eliminate a big hole or gap by our thumb in our mitten later on. So now we're on to the 6-stitch top outline of our thumb hole. And so we're going to do another decrease. We're going to decrease those, make a decrease stitch over the first 2 stitches. So we're just going to half double crochet those first 2 stitches together. So right now we're going in to the next stitch, which is the 3rd stitch along the top. So we're going to have double crochet into the next stitch. This is the 4th. And then we're going to do a decrease over the 5th and 6th stitches over this top edge. So we're just going to make a half double crochet decrease over those next 2 stitches. Next, we're back at our corner again, and we're going to do another decrease over our corner. Remember, these weren't actual stitches. This is just going to help us later on. So decrease over that corner. And now we're back at our bottom edge. So now we're decreasing over stitch 1 and 2 along our bottom edge. So we're doing our half double crochet decrease, and now we have 1 stitch left, and we're half double crocheting into there. And so now we're back at the end. And I'm just going to get that tail out of the way. I'm just going to tuck that into my mitten, and I'm not going to worry about that right now. This is what your thumb should look like. It should have 10 stitches, and we're just going to work in half double crochet into each stitch around until we have 6 rounds of half double crochet for our thumb, or until the thumb hole is the height of your thumb. I suggest you try it on as you go. Alright, so I've done actually 5 rounds for my thumb, and I'm going to see where I'm at. And actually, it looks like I can do one more. It looks like my thumb is sticking out just a little bit, so I am going to do that last 6th round of half double crochet. So I'm just going to work one more round. Okay, there's another round. So let's try this on again. And yeah, see, this is much better. So we want our thumb opening to be level with our thumb, just about. I'm going to cut my yarn, leaving a nice long tail, and we're going to fasten off. And using the same technique that we did for the top of our mitten, we're going to whip stitch around the top of the thumb hole. So grab your yarn needle and thread it. And you're going to whip stitch from the inside of your mitten out into the tops of each of those stitches around. Just going to work around until you get back around to the beginning again. Okay, so I reached back around to the beginning, and we're just going to gently pull to cinch the thumb closed. And use your needle to stitch the top closed to make sure that that hole is completely closed. Okay, and that looks good. So now just take that tail and push it to the inside, and now that tail's ready to be weaved in later. Alright, so now let's try it on. Fold up the cuff. Super comfy and super soft. And I'm going to try it on my other hand. and it's designed to fit both your hands. It doesn't matter left or right. You make both the mittens the same. So just make another one and you'll have a pair of mittens. And just a reminder, this was designed to go with my boysenberry shawl. So if you haven't tried that yet, be sure to check it out. I'll have it linked up here and also in the description box below. I really hope you found this tutorial helpful, and if you did, be sure to give the video a thumbs up and subscribe so you never miss a new tutorial. Thank you so much for watching. Bye!